All right, guys, here we go. This is chapter 29, and it is called For Better or For Worse. Land of Stories. All the kings and queens left the charming kingdom the following day to celebrate the news of Enchantress's defeat with their people. Red was the only one who stayed behind because at the end of the week, she, Froggy, Goldilocks, Jack, Bob, Charlotte, and the twins all attended Rumpelstiltskin's funeral. Hearing the news of his final act and what his last words had been was hard for the seven dwarfs to swallow, so they wanted to make sure the ceremony was everything Rapunzel would have wanted. It was a small ceremony in the dwarf forest on the front lawn of the seven dwarfs' cottage. The dwarfs had made their brother a casket of glass and jewels from their mines, just as they had for Snow White. He was buried in a daisy-covered field not too far from the cottage. The dwarfs said Rumpelstiltskin had spent a lot of time there when he was younger, and they knew he would have been happy to make it his final place of rest. His tombstone even read, "Here lies Rumpelstiltskin, the eighth brother of a proud dwarf family." That night, when they arrived back at the charming kingdom, King Chase and Queen Cinderella hosted a dinner to honor the twins and the others who had sailed on the Granny. Connor was seated at the table in the dining hall when a man sat next to him and started up a conversation. "I'm looking forward to this," the man said. "I miss being a part of the famous charming dinner parties." "Do I know you?" Connor asked him, and gave the man the side eye. "Connor, it's me," the man said. "It's Froggy." Connor shook his head and looked at the man again. He always forgot Froggy was an actual human, but no matter what physical form he took, he always had the same kind eyes. "Your grandmother changed me back as soon as we returned from the funeral," Froggy said. "The funny thing is, I had grown so accustomed to being a frog, I'd forgotten she still had to change me back." "Do you miss anything about being a frog?" Connor asked him. "I do miss reaching the books on the top shelf without a ladder," he said. "One doesn't realize how useful frog legs can be until they lose them." A twinkle came to Froggy's eyes. "Speaking of reading, I have something for you." He reached into his lapel and pulled out a rolled up stack of parchments. "When we were setting up the camps for the trolls, I found these in Granny's wreckage," Froggy said, and handed the parchments over to Connor. "My stories," Connor said. "I thought these were lost forever." "I must admit, I enjoyed them quite a bit," Froggy said. "You've got a real knack for storytelling, although I do have a few words of advice for you." "What's that?" Connor asked. "Never let Red read these," Froggy said. "I thought it was very clever writing everyone as trolls, but she would have you executed if she read your interpretation of her." Connor chuckled and playfully punched Froggy's shoulder. "No, I'm serious," Froggy said. Connor gulped. The others finally arrived and took seats around the table. Jack and Goldilocks looked down timidly at all the silverware, not knowing what to start with. Red entered the room and almost blinded everyone with the amount of jewelry she was wearing. Even for a formal dinner in the Charming Palace, Red was overdressed. Bob sat down across from Connor, looking unusually tense. "What's wrong, Bob?" Connor said. "You look like you're about to operate on the president." Alex cleared her throat to get Connor's attention. "He's going to ask or propose to Mom tonight," Alex mouthed when her mother wasn't looking. "Oh," Connor mouthed back excitedly to Bob and his sister. He gave Bob an unsubtle wink and a thumbs up. "Is everything all right, Connor?" Charlotte asked. Yes," Connor said. "I'm just really looking forward to the appetizers." Alex rolled her eyes at him. Charlotte studied her son suspiciously, afraid he was coming down with a cold. A footman presented a tray to Goldilocks with an envelope addressed to her on it. "A letter has come for you, madam," the footman said. "For me?" Goldilocks said. "I wonder what it could be." She opened the envelope and read the note inside. An amused but shocked grin came to her face. She wasn't sure how to feel about the news she received. "What is it?" Jack asked her. "It's a note from Red Riding Hood Castle stables," Goldilocks said. "Porridge is pregnant." Jack and the twins couldn't contain themselves. Each one laughed harder than the next. Buckle, the twins said together. I knew there was something going on between them, Connor said. The dinner began, and the room was served course after course of the best food the twins had ever eaten. Just before the desserts were brought out, Bob tapped the side of his glass with a spoon, and he got the room's attention. Alex and Connor shot excited looks at each other. This was it. I just want to thank you all so much for having me tonight, Bob said. I'm fairly new to the Bailey clan, so learning about all of you and coming into this world has been, well, the adventure of my life. And seeing that I happen to be in a room filled with people who make up the greatest love stories ever told, I would like to take this moment for all it's worth. Charlotte looked back and forth between the twins, seeing if they knew what Bob was up to. They purposefully avoided her eyes, wanting Bob to surprise her fully. He got down on one knee and presented the ring to her. Charlotte, will you make me the happiest man in the world, both worlds, and be my wife? Bob said. Tears instantly filled Charlotte's surprised eyes. I, she said, and everyone in the dining hall was on the edge of their seat. Yes, I would love nothing more. Bob put the ring on Charlotte's finger and hugged her. Alex began to cry, which made Connor's eyes start to water, which ultimately caused everyone else in the room to well up too. It was a picturesque moment, even by fairy tale standards. You should get married in the palace, Cinderella said, from the end of the table. What? Charlotte asked, not believing her ears. Please, we insist, Cinderella said, and took King Chance's hand in hers. We've been trying to think of a way to thank you for taking care of Hope when you were being held up by the enchantress. It would be our pleasure. Charlotte didn't know what to say. She was stunned by the offer. That is so kind, but I'm not sure I could ever— Mom, Alex interrupted her. Speaking on behalf of every woman who has ever lived in the other world, you cannot turn down the offer to have an actual fairy tale wedding. I have to agree, it would be pretty cool, Connor said. Charlotte shrugged. The decision was basically made for her. Well, all right then. I'd be honored, thank you, she said. We have to get back to our jobs in the other world, but I suppose we can have a quick wedding with our friends here and then another one for our friends back home. Everyone raised their glasses to toast Charlotte and Bob. May you live happily ever after, the fairy godmother said. Red tapped her glass and stood at her seat. No one could look directly at her because of the light reflecting off her diamonds. I would like to add to the celebration with some wonderful news of my own, she said. After speaking with the fairies and all the other kings and queens, I would like to announce that Happily Ever After Assembly has decided to pardon Jack and Goldilocks for all their crimes and waive all warrants for their arrest as a thank you for their daring and valiant efforts in defeating the enchantress. The room burst into applause and congratulated the couple. However, Jack and Goldilocks looked the least excited out of all of them. Wonderful, Goldilocks said through a pained smile. Cheers, Jack said reluctantly, raising his glass to the others, toasting them. You can move back into your old house, Jack, Red said, which is going to be really convenient because I've decided to build my country home right beside it. Jack and Goldilocks did their best to look as if it was good news, and it excited them. Red went on and on about all the wonderful double dates they could have with her and Froggy and all the activities they could do now that they were going to be neighbors. Goldilocks leaned towards Jack. Well, at least I won't have to feel guilty about making you live the life of an outlaw anymore, she said. No more running from soldiers or close encounters with ogres or sneaking into shops to steal food or sleeping under the stars in dangerous forests, Jack said. It's tempting to live a quieter life, Goldilocks said half-heartedly. Just imagine us living the rest of our days in your manor, watching the grass grow with Red and Charlie. Jack and Goldilocks smirked at each other, both thinking the same thing. They couldn't imagine a worse fate. Goldilocks whispered something into Jack's ear, and a big grin appeared on his face. The twins looked to each other, knowing something was up. Goldilocks stood up from the table and walked over to Red. She endearingly wrapped her arms around her old nemesis and gave her a big hug. What's all this about? Red asked. I just want to thank you, Goldilocks said. What you've done for us is so generous, and we'll never be able to repay you. Red looked like she was about to cry. You're so welcome, Red said. And even though we both tried to kill each other, I tricked you into going in a house with 3 furious bears. You tried to throw me into a bottomless pit. I would like it very much if we put the past aside and let our friendship bloom even more. Goldilocks smiled at her. I think that's a wonderful idea, Red, she said. Now, if you'll just excuse me, I'm going to step out for a moment. Goldilocks gave Red another hug and excused herself from the dining room. The dessert was finally served, and Connor looked up and down the table to make sure his piece of cake wasn't any smaller than the rest of theirs. Hey, that's not fair. Red got 2 pieces of... Connor stopped himself mid-complaint. Something was different. He was looking at Red without squinting. Hey, Red, where's your necklace? My necklace? Red asked. She reached up to her neck and screamed when she discovered her diamond necklace was missing. That doesn't make any sense. How could it have possibly vanished? Goldilocks! Both the twins turned to Jack. He wiped his mouth with his napkin, trying to hide a giant grin underneath it. Sir Lambton suddenly rushed into the dining room. He had built a reputation of constantly bringing such awful news in the last few days. The entire room went silent to hear what he had to say. Yes, Sir Lambton, King Chance asked. Pardon my intrusion, Your Majesty, Lambton said. With all due respect, did you give Goldilocks permission to take one of the horses from the stable, or has one just been stolen? Everyone's eyes immediately darted to Jack. Well, that's my cue, he said, and stood up from the table. Alex and Connor, it's wonderful to see you again, and I'd like to thank you for everyone else for a lovely evening and a wonderful time at dinner. Good night. With that said, Jack ran down the dining hall and jumped out of the closet window. Red leapt up from the table and ran over to the window, and Froggy and the twins followed her, peering through it. They arrived just in time to see Jack sliding down the slanted roof and landing perfectly on the back of a horse, and Goldilocks held the reins of a horse that Goldilocks held the reins of on the ground. They both waved up at Red, Froggy, and the twins. Red's necklace sparkled in the moonlight on Goldilocks' neck. That's my necklace, Red yelled. Bring that back to me at once. Goldilocks yanked on the reins, and she and Jack rode off into the night, happy outlaws once again. Red slammed her hands on the windowsill. I cannot believe I wasted an ounce of generosity on that woman, she yelled. Sir Lambton, I want you to put a team of your finest men together and go after her at once. But I don't work for you, Lambton said. No excuses, Lambton. Find them, Red demanded. Lambton looked at King Chance and Cinderella. They both shrugged. Right away, Queen Red, Lambton said with a sigh, and left the room. Alex, Connor, and Froggy couldn't help but laugh as they watched their friends ride off into the night. Much as it distressed Red, they were happy to see Jack and Goldilocks return to their own habitat. Charlotte and Bob's wedding was just 2 days later. The entire palace was decorated in flowers and the giant banners. Bells rang throughout the entire kingdom. In charming tradition, the twins' grandmother transformed their mother's nursing scrubs into a beautiful white gown and veil. Alex and Connor had never seen her so beautiful, and both grew a little misty-eyed because of it. They were so happy to see their mom get the wedding dress she deserved. The ceremony was held in the ballroom, and it was so crowded the twins thought the entire kingdom might have shown up. The fairy godmother conducted the ceremony herself. Princess Hope was led down the aisle by her mother and acted as a flower girl, and Connor was Bob's best man, and Alex was her mother's maid of honor. Do you, Charlotte, take this man to be your husband? The fairy godmother asked. I do, Charlotte said. And do you, Robert, take this woman to be your wife? I do, Bob said. The vows were only interrupted once as Red loudly blew her nose from the seats, overcome by the ceremony and still upset by losing her favorite necklace. By the power invested in me by the Happily Ever After Assembly, I now pronounce you husband and wife, the fairy godmother happily called out. You may now kiss the bride. The twins both turned their heads the other way, and the crowd cheered. Bob, Charlotte, and the twins then got into a carriage in the shape of a pumpkin and rode throughout the charming kingdom streets, waving to all the well-wishers who had gathered there. I think this family's off to a good start, Connor said. That evening, as soon as all the festivities were over, the fairy council met the fairy godmother at the charming palace. They were there on official council business and called together a meeting so exclusive no one but the fairies was allowed to be a part of it. The fairy godmother waved her wand and made a door appear that led into the other world. And she and the other fairies waited for Mother Goose to arrive so the meeting could start. Mother Goose eventually emerged through the door, dragging her basket of a suitcase and a very defiant and reluctant Lester with her. "Come on, Lester," she said. "I know you love the slot machines, but we can't stay in Vegas forever." If her appearance was any indication, Mother Goose had done a lot of traveling in the last week. She wore a large sombrero that said Tijuana across it, a colorful Hawaiian lei around her neck, a large I Love New York t-shirt, and wooden Dutch shoes. A foam finger from a football game was still over her hand. "Looks like you were busy, OMG, Connor said. "Hey, Sea Dog, just because you and your sister saved the world doesn't mean you get to be sassy," Mother Goose snapped at him. "I was afraid the Enchantress was going to cross into the other world, so I went to all my favorite places before she could destroy them." Alex looked over her worldly outfit. "I see you went to Mexico, New York, Hawaii, and a football game? But where are the shoes from?" she asked. "Amsterdam," Mother Goose said. "They love me over there." "I didn't know nursery rhymes were popular in Amsterdam," Connor said. "They're not," Mother Goose said. "They don't know me as Mother Goose. They have their own nickname for me when I visit." "What's that?" Alex asked. "Mother Mayhem," she said. The twins just nodded, not wanting to know any details. "All right, let's get this hen in the oven," Mother Goose said, and clapped her hands. She followed the fairy council into a private drawing room. "It's about time you showed up," Tangerina said. "Mind your beeswax, Tangy," Mother Goose said. "No, I'm serious. Your bees are getting that crap all over the floor." The fairies shut the door tightly behind them. Naturally, the twins placed their ears up to the door and tried eavesdropping as much as possible. "The world is still in shambles," the twins heard as Esmeralda's voice fade in and out. "We're slowly clearing the Eastern Kingdom of all the thorn bushes and vines. The Northern Kingdom has finally rid itself of all the poisoned food. Esmia's pillar of rock and dirt still needs to be removed. And there's one thing that we haven't discussed yet that involved you, Fairy Godmother." The twins looked to each other. Their curiosity consumed them whole. "I'll be right back," Connor said. And a few moments later, he returned with empty glasses from the palace kitchen. He handed one to Alex, and they placed them over the door and up to their ears. They could hear what the fairies were saying much more clearly now. "You understand how difficult that will be for my family, don't you?" they heard their grandmother say. We're not proposing it to be cruel, we're proposing it to be preventative," Skylene said. "If we don't do something, it'll be only a matter of time before someone else follows in the Enchantress's footsteps," Xanthia said. "In the end, it's your decision," Esmeralda said. "It's your gift. You were chosen to be the gatekeeper. We can only tell you what we think is best for both worlds." Alex and Connor looked at each other. "I understand," their grandmother said. "And if it's what the rest of you think is the right thing to do, I cannot ignore that. I just don't know how I'm going to break the news to my grandchildren." "You can take as much time as you need," Esmeralda said. The twins heard them start to come toward the door and ran down the hallway so they wouldn't be caught listening. Their curiosity ate them alive for the rest of the day. What was the news their grandmother was going to have difficulty telling them? Why did it affect them and her ability to move between the worlds? The twins' imaginations didn't do them any favors as they thought on what the possibilities could be. Luckily, they weren't forced to suffer too long. That night, after dinner, the Fairy Council called everyone into the ballroom to fill them in on what they had discussed. "It's going to take some time before the world can fully recover from the damage the Enchantress caused," Esmeralda said. "Esmia may be gone, but the fact is, what she tried to accomplish still remains a possibility as long as the two worlds are joined." "So what are you saying?" Connor said. The fairy godmother closed her eyes, not wanting to see her grandchildren's faces when they heard it. "For the greater good of both worlds, we have decided to close the gateway between them," Esmeralda said. Alex felt like she was being told her father was dead or her mother had been kidnapped all over again. Her stomach tightened and her heart beat at a rapid pace. She felt her palms go clammy and the rest of her body go numb. "What?" she asked breathlessly. "How is that even possible?" Connor asked. He also was having an incredibly hard time processing the news. "It's possible if we use our magic together," their grandmother regretfully told them. So what does that mean? Connor asked. Does that mean we'll never be able to see you again? Their grandmother shook her head, happy to report one small consolation. I was able to convince the other fairies to supply us with a way to see each other, she said. She waved her wand, and two long, square mirrors and golden frames appeared. We'll be able to see each other using these mirrors whenever we want. We just won't be able to travel between worlds, Connor asked. Their mother closed her eyes and nodded her head. It was clearly almost as painful for her to tell them as it was for them to hear it. Alex was shaking her head profusely and tears began running down her face. No, Grandma, Alex pleaded. Tell me it isn't true. I'm afraid so, honey, Grandma said. Alex lost it completely and buried her head in her mother's side. She cried so hard she was practically silent, except for her deep gasps for air. Charlotte tried to remain strong for her kids, but she was having a hard time keeping it together herself. She knew what that news meant for them. And you're okay with this? Connor yelled, tears spilling down from his own eyes. I hate it as much as you do, their grandmother said, but to secure the safety of both worlds, we don't have any other option. Connor could only get one word of his next question out. When? He said, and his voice cracked as he fought back emotion. Tomorrow at dusk, his grandmother said, waging her own waging her own emotional battle inside. Alex couldn't stand to hear any more of it. She ran from the ballroom and headed up the stairs to her chambers, her hands covering her face as she went. Alex? Charlotte called out, but it was no use. Alex shut the door to the chambers behind her and collapsed on the floor. She cried and cried for hours and hours. She had lived through the fear of losing the fairy tale world so many times, and now it was real. It was actually being taken away from her. And all of the time, her greatest fear had been realized right after she learned how much potential she had to offer this world. Right after she discovered she had a chance of being the future fairy godmother someday. Right after her uncertain future had nearly been set, it was all being taken from her. It felt like the land of stories had always been dangling in front of her and her brother like a taunting cat toy. Every time they thought they had finally grabbed hold of it, it slipped out of their grip. She cried until her tear ducts dried up, and she couldn't cry anymore. She lay on the bed and prayed there would be some way around this nightmare. A soft knock came at the door. Alex, can I come in? Charlotte asked from the other side. Sure, Alex said. Charlotte walked into the room and took a seat on the bed next to her devastated daughter. It's so unfair, Mom, Alex said. After everything we've been through, after everything we've seen, why does this have to be taken from us too? Charlotte rubbed her hand gently on Alex's knee. Alex sat up and looked at her mom. She was crying almost more than Alex had been. Why are you crying so much, Mom? Alex asked. You're not losing anything. Charlotte smiled. Oh, but I am, honey, she said. A year ago, when you and your brother first came back from this place, I knew then I had lost my little girl forever. I watched her grow sadder and sadder the more time she spent away from this place, and I knew there was nothing I could ever do to help her, because her heart belonged somewhere else. Mom, what are you talking about? Alex asked. Charlotte put a hand on Alex's face and looked at her daughter through the tears in her eyes. I'm saying, I'm not going to let you leave the place where you belong, she said. Next chapter is chapter 30, The Goodbye.